Okay, greetings everyone. My name is Aida Dargahi. I'm the director of Humanities Lecture Series and a faculty member in the Humanities Department at Foothill College. First and most, I want to thank my colleague, Dr. Lori Clinchard, who has given us this place at the California History Center to conduct this important event. With Dr. Clinchard's leadership, the California History Center continues to do important work of education, archival work, and events about California's rich history. We are honored to be here. Thank you. On behalf of the Center of Applied Humanities Fellows, I'm delighted to welcome to our panel discussions, Inclusive Dialogues, a panel discussion on race, gender, and the journey to equality. Thank you for joining us. Now, let's begin. In a rapidly evolving society driven by technology and scientific advancement, it is crucial not to overlook the enduring significance of the humanities. The panel discussion event aims to explore various dimensions of race and gender equality, shedding light on the challenges, progresses, and future directions in our collective journey toward inclusivity. Our goal is to foster an open dialogue that encourages reflection, learning, and taking actionable steps toward a more equitable society. Our distinguished panelists bring forth a wealth of perspectives, expertise, and lived experiences, offering invaluable insights that will undoubtedly inspire, educate, and empower us all. Together, we will explore the pathway to creating a more inclusive world where every voice is heard, respected, and celebrated. Get ready to engage in dialogues with these thought leaders as they navigate the complexity of race and gender, exploring pathways to equality to drive meaningful change in our communities and beyond. Before the discussion begins, let me introduce our panelists. Ashley Adams. Dr. Ashley Adams is Associate Professor at Mills College, brings rich heritage as a descendant of Nicodemus, Kansas settlers and Tulsa Race Massacre survivors. She serves as the board secretary for the Nicodemus Historical Society. Her research primarily centers on the preservation of Black history, with collaboration extending to institutes such as the National Park Service and the Smithsonian Institution. Dr. Adams is also actively involved in African American history and engagement project at Allensworth State Historic Park. Furthermore, she co-chairs of both Mills College Black Faculty and Staff Association and Black Reparations Project, advancing reparations, research, and education. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Adams. Mariam Daha. Professor Mariam Daha is a faculty member at Foothill College Child Development and Education Department and has more than 35 years experience working with children, families, and teachers from diverse backgrounds. She has taught classes on anti-bias education, culturally responsive teaching, child development, and teacher-family communication at Foothill and other educational institutions. She is also a presenter at national, state, and local conferences and has educated a wide range of workshops and training in her field. Mariam holds master's degree in social foundation in education and early childhood education from Stanford University. She is a published author on the topics of ethnic identity and development and addressing microaggression in teacher-family relationship. Thank you, Professor Daha, for joining us. Nicole Gonzalez-Hall. Dr. Nicole Gonzalez-Hall started her higher education journey at Fresno Community College, received her BA from University of Southern California, MA from California State University, Fresno, and her PhD from Syracuse University in composition and cultural rhetoric. In 2014, Nicole was selected as one of the ethnic minority dissertation fellows at the University of San Francisco, and she is now an associate professor in UCSF's rhetoric and language department. Although Nicole primarily teaches writing and public speaking courses in rhetoric, she also teaches for the Critical Diversity Studies Department at USF's Honors College. Dr. Hall's research focuses on the importance of social location of both students and teachers and its relationship to many aspects of education, teacher affect, program administration, and in particular with writing assessment. Thank you, Nicole, and sorry for that. Tony Kashani. Dr. Tony Kashani is a distinguished Iranian-American author, educator, philosopher of technology, and cultural critic. Dr. Kashani serves as a faculty member within the doctoral program in education and individualized Masters of Arts program at Antioch University, focusing his interdisciplinary scholarship and pedagogy on humanities in digital age and social justice. He has authored a collection of 6 compelling books. These notable works include titles such as his most recent book, Meditation on Resistance, An Inquiry into AI, Critical Media Literacy, and Social Justice. Movies Change Lives, Hollywood Exploited, and Cultural Studies, and Lost in Media. His work is deeply rooted in the foundation of critical theory and pedagogy. Presently, he is completing a book manuscript on AI literacy to be published in 2024. And he will be our moderator for today's panel discussion. Thank you, Dr. Kashani. Thank you, all colleagues, and thank you, the audience. And please take away, Professor Kashani.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you so much, Professor Dargahi, for a lofty introduction to me. I feel honored, and this is a great privilege for me to moderate a discussion and being among very powerful women here. It truly is an honor, and I mean that. I would like us to get started with the initial question about what keeps us up at night. So I'd like to ask the panel, my colleagues, what keeps you up at night? What is it that really bothers you, inspires you, excites you, gives you the impetus to go look for information, look for data, try to synthesize all of that information and think about what you want to say and how you want to change the world? Because in the context of this discussion, we want to change the world. The world as it is not fair. We do not have gender equality, although we're working really hard to get there through solidarity, allyship, connections, right? We don't have world peace as it's indicated through the news 24/7 news cycle that we're all exposed to and sometimes assaulted by and all the rest of it. So there are issues that we have to work on. So let's start. And I'll let the panel organically decide who wants to go first, who wants to go second, and I'll be the last one to say a few things about what keeps me up at night. So we'll let it start.
I'm happy to start us off. Thank you, everybody. So yeah, what keeps me up at night? I guess it's two sides in some ways of the same coin. When I say inequity and the larger gap we're seeing between the haves and the have-nots in the U.S. specifically, although globally as well, I would say what I mean by that though is this real division of well, I'm going to call it money hoarding, right? This idea that that there's ever a reason to allow excess in really any community, that we don't have distributed wealth so that we can all have access to healthcare, access to social services. And that really keeps me up at night because it keeps people in really unhealthy circumstances. Now, the flip side of that coin, though, right? I guess two sides of one coin, that the opportunity is, I believe, as an educator, is really in the hands of education. And I think this can happen at the K-12 level, but my area of expertise is in higher education. And what I really feel like has to happen with us is we need to teach teachers how to teach. So one of the biggest secrets of higher ed is that many faculty are not formally trained in how to teach and the science of something like memory. How do we even remember what we learn? How do we best learn? And so my kind of change maker opportunity right now, and I hope we get around to it, Tony, is when we talk about generative AI and how it's really shaking up higher ed and teaching in general. While it's scary and daunting, I also think it's giving us an opportunity to make changes in higher ed that have been a century in the making, that we've needed it for a long time. Too much, static, just everything as is kind of energy around higher ed, and now we can't operate that way. So I'm really hoping that's the big side of this, is I think those kind of social inequities will be addressed by really giving more people an opportunity to learn, to critically think, to imagine something that doesn't currently exist. And we're able to do that if and when we decide to teach faculty how to teach towards anti-racism, towards equity, towards inclusivity, and how to work with each other. So I think that's what keeps me up at night is, oh gosh, how do we keep developing this stuff so that we get better at what we do, and that we are able to help folks make positive change.
Okay.
Thank you. This is a really challenging question, Tony. And I don't... I don't know if I want to acknowledge this as something that keeps me up, because I don't want to claim it as a stressor, but I'll claim it as something that is deeply rooted within me in terms of my motivation for continuing to do the work that I do, and kind of where it all started for me. It started with my ancestors. My ancestors were early settlers in a town called Nicodemus, Kansas, which was a historic Black town, and today it's a National Historic Site. And the National Park Service is there, which I work very closely with them in my role as president for the Nicodemus Historical Society. Many of the folks that I work with are also descendants of early settlers, and a lot of them are actually my relatives. And growing up, for me, knowing that history, since I was a child and coming into my career and being able to continue to engage with preserving that history in my career as a public policy professor who studies preservation policy, it just hits different in terms of why I do the work and why I moved into doing work around Black reparations, because not only am I, obviously I identify as a Black woman in America. I have Black experience every single day of my life, all of my family, a lot of people that I love and care about. I have seen the human condition in that sense up close and personal from a historic standpoint to this is where we are today. And it's there's no way to describe what you experience when you're working with other descendants, who know their history, and seeing what we're experiencing today on a social level. That's what drives me. And it does keep me up sometimes because, I just, like all of it, the big picture together, it's kind of overwhelming. And all of the work that I do in different avenues, whether it's through my research or whether it's, me volunteering, doing the preservation work in Nicodemus, it's all connected for me because I want to see healing in the Black community. And it extends beyond the Black community, but that is where my heart is. And the reason why is because of that ancestral history in my life that I know, and how connected I am to it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. My field is child development, so I work with teachers and principals and directors in like preschool and elementary schools mainly. And what keeps me up at night is actually what's happening to our teachers right now. They're reprimanded. I've been doing anti-bias work since most of my life. So the ones who want to do anti-bias work in the classroom, they're being reprimanded, they're being punished, they're scared, and I know some were fired. And the other one is the banning of the books. Many of the children's books that we use are banned in certain parts of the country, and the teachers are scared to use them, the ones that use anti-bias education. Now, diversity is being used as an empty word, a lot of exclusions. Even diversity is an action verb for me. It's an action word. But unfortunately, we're seeing it as an empty word. Some people are included and some people are excluded. And on the other hand, I have to say that there's some hope. I'm always hopeful. Anti-bias work has always been challenging. It's not comfortable. But I also see a lot of resistance from teachers in the midst of all this chaos, me being one. We keep on going with the movement and we keep on doing what we do. But teachers are really having a hard time. And I have to keep on working with them not to give up. So anyway, that is one thing that came to my mind. It's not one thing, but it just keeps me.
Well, the fact of the matter is that there's so many things that could easily keep us up at night, right? And sometimes they get overwhelming for us, and that's why there is such a thing as melatonin. But although once in a while I have to use melatonin to go to sleep, there's so many things that came up this discussion that I like for us to dig into, because our work, collective work, given our dedication, which is absolutely genuine, otherwise we wouldn't be sitting at this table, has to do with a commitment to social justice. Social justice, it's so easy to say these things. Oh yeah, diversity, equity, inclusion. Now we have an acronym for it, right? We live in America, so everything has to be an acronym. A DEI, like, are you a DEI person, or is this a DEI hiring, or leaders in DEI, and there is a lot of performative work happening in the arena of social justice. That I wonder if my colleagues will agree with me in that regard. If they're nodding their heads, and you can see, that means we're all in the same camp. Yes, we live in a media-saturated, AI-driven, and AI now is the buzzword, right? Everybody's using it. Artificial intelligence, which is actually a misnomer, because the systems that are in place, there's many dimensions to AI. And this is what keeps me up at night, because I'm constantly reading up on it, giving talks, workshops, and actually writing books about it and all that stuff. But enough about me. Let's talk about AI. Let's talk about the assault against teachers, right? We live in a country that underappreciates, at best, the teachers, where people give their children to for, I don't know how many hours. If it's kindergarten, it's 3 hours. If it's elementary, is 6 hours. And sometimes there's after-school program and all of that. But they don't trust the teachers to be able to make a living. It's topsy-turvy situation that we find ourselves in. So the work starts in the classroom, but then there is another teacher out there, artificially intelligent teacher, the AI-driven teacher that is in the video games. It's in the television, on the television screens. That's in people's phones. It's on Instagram and TikTok and WeChat and all the rest of it. Those are sites of pedagogy. But many teachers are either too busy and overwhelmed with the administrative work and the fear of losing their careers and all the tasks that are given to them and all that, or kind of like pushed aside from the connection to that sort of thing. So we need to urgently get in there, look under the hood and see what's going on. Because the forces, the neoliberal forces that run the show, right, that pretend to be for DEI, for inclusion and all of that, right, and happily will put black and brown faces in certain places of organizations, and this includes the institutes of higher ed, right, colleges and universities, and as well as the government posts, but not at the very top, right? They'll put black and brown faces and say, look, this is America. This is the face of America. But where is the solidarity? I mean, this is what I would like us to talk about, because is it okay if we use first names for this discussion? Professor Dargahi, are we allowed to use first names? Yes. Of course. Thank you, ma'am. Ashley brought up the black experience in America, all right? By America, I'm talking about the United States, of course. You were born here, raised here. This is your home, right? You are connected to an ancestry that has a rich history, but it's not acknowledged. You are not acknowledged, same as others who are born and raised here with a different kind of ancestry. And the question is, why not, right? And that's a question that many school children, and Marianne will attest to this, but talking about, what is happening to our teachers in the classroom, they push back, they're lashing against teachers about teaching about these stuff. Why is this the case, right? Say, for example, if this talk was happening in Florida, we'd probably get arrested afterwards, right? Because, you're talking about critical race theory? Are you crazy, right? You're going to make our 8-year-olds feel like they're racists? Right? This is the kind of craziness that we're dealing with. So let's pick that up. How do we build solidarity? Does it happen in the classroom with our students who are fellow co-learners? Do we learn from our students? Or do we put them at a distance and say, I am the sage on stage, I'm going to teach you about the world. We say, you teach me about what is happening in your world. And I will try to transmit any kind of wisdom that I have through teaching, learning, traveling, making friends, being, together and trying to be in solidarity with one another. Why? Because we care about, if you look at it through a humanist perspective, we care about all human beings. We want all of us to have equal access to opportunities. We want all of us to be at the same level. We want to treat each other as ends in ourselves, not as means to an end, which is unfortunately what happens in corporations and institutes of learning even, right? Where people are using one another, self-serving leaders out there to pretend to be working in the interest of our students, interest of our fellow citizens and so on. And yet, when you look at the evidence, you see that, well, it's all about their agenda, right? So that's a tough proposition, right? How do you tackle that? How do you build solidarity? So I wonder if my colleagues want to chime in. Please.
No, everything you said was very real. I really appreciate all of that. And what I have learned on my journey, and I actually, at Mills College at Northeastern University, we use the term ADEIB. So that's anti-racism, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And what I have learned in my journey is it is a big, huge, complex problem. As you just described, a lot of dynamics of it. It really requires individual work. It's a systemic problem, but at the end of the day, there are actual people who are behind these systems. And in order to, whether we want to use the word dismantle or, change, social change, whatever word you want to use, it requires individual work. There are actual people behind, institutions, behind buildings, inside of offices who are making these decisions, and they haven't done the work themselves in order to understand and learn, what social empathy is, or even, how it applies to their life, and recognizing their positionality and the political power that they have in the positions that they are in, and, how they might be contributing white supremacy practices in their role. And it could be anybody on any different level, whether it be in a K through 12 school district or even in a classroom or, running a school or at a higher education institution. Everybody who works for the district, everybody who works for the college has a responsibility. And until we can get to a point where we have a culture that respects, acknowledges, and understands that, well, we're going to keep seeing the same system, right? So that's my response to it. I know it's complicated.
Yeah.
Well, it is complicated, but I totally agree. We can't do this in isolation. With anti-bias and anti-racist work that I'm very involved in, it really needs a lot of support, and that's what I always tell my students. You can't do this by yourself. The reason I could bring anti-bias work into my classroom when I was a preschool teacher in 1990, so you can see my age, I go way back, because I had the support of the director. And I had the support of my co-teacher. So that's really important. We can't do this in isolation. We need to have trusted colleagues that we can go to. We need to have, because this is not a comfortable job. And many things come up that we need to do consultation. Some people that we can trust. The other thing you said about learning, we learn from children. I work with children. with their questions and comments, I learned from them. And they spark, actually, the long-term project that I want to do afterwards. It doesn't end with just me answering the question. And many of my students are actually scared that they make mistakes to answer these questions. These are hard questions. I mean, children really understand. I mean, you know, but we learn from those mistakes. I said, it's better to answer rather than not to answer. And if you don't know, okay, I said, I don't know, but I'm going to think about it. And I will get back to you. And then I go to my colleagues. That's why it's so important to have those colleagues and trusted friends. And sometimes we don't agree, not necessarily agree, but then we can learn from each other. So yeah, I learn from children. I also learn from my students, you know, from the answers to the reflections, for example. Then I know how to expand on it. Then I reflect more. So it's really a community work. It's not just me working here. So yeah, that's what I say, solidarity, where we need to work together. One of the complaints that's happening, though, that I'm going to start giving workshops on that, is that teachers are complaining to me that they can't work with other teachers very well. And my focus has been always with parents and teachers, but that's another thing, because we need solidarity here, the teachers working together instead of, you know, behind each other's back. And anyway, that's what I think.
Yeah, and I think building on that idea of teachers not being able to work with each other, or people sometimes not being able to work with each other, that really gets at the heart of what I think we need in terms of building solidarity. And that's a way to be better at asking questions and at listening and not reacting. And I say this knowing that it's hard for me, okay? So sometimes I'll be in a professional development workshop or meeting, and somebody says something I find either incredibly insensitive or downright racist in origin, and I can feel my body start to react, even if my mind is saying, slow down, you know, give them some time, ask the questions, Nicole. It's still visceral in my response, and I'm really working on my own ability to not, you know, physically respond, not because not because I'm not valid in it. I am absolutely valid in those feelings, but in order to coach folks along and to say the long-term goal is to recognize we're all in our own place in this journey. And Nicole 30 years ago had very different ideology than the Nicole that's sitting up here today. And I have to remember that I've had a lifetime of being in a brown body and a female body, and then I've had 20 plus years of formal education around these issues. Not everybody's going to be right there with me. So how do I find the kind of grace to work through this, right? And to also forgive myself on those moments when I don't. So I think to build solidarity, we really have to be in a generous mindset and say, how do we ask the questions that help folks ask themselves the important questions and reflect on where their attitudes come from. I really focus a lot on language and language discrimination. And so thinking about where are your attitudes towards language use coming from? Where do we start to hierarchize certain kind of language users and the language that they use? And interrogate that. And I think just really letting folks come to it as they need to is helpful. I'm going to make this plug even though I have zero ties to it. But one of the things I think also is to read and use the book called Do the Work. It's a recent publication out this last year, 2023, I believe, by W. Kamau Bell and Kate Schatz. It's a super accessible way to do that reflection and think about our own privileges, think about the history of the United States. They do all kinds of like puzzles and word searches and coloring activities, but that are really profound and meaningful. They call it an anti-racist activity book, and I've used this both in my personal circles, but also in professional circles. And I think it's a useful way because, as Ashley said from the beginning, right, we have to be willing to do this work. We have to be able to decide we're going to reflect on this so that it's important enough to us to understand the history from perspectives that we maybe don't embody. And in order to do that, not everybody has another time to get a PhD, right? Or have enough time to get another PhD. So how do we do this in friendly, kind of bite-sized but poignant ways? And I do underscore friendly. It's okay to disagree, but if we get it to the point where it's just such conflict that it shuts down conversation, nobody's gaining from that. So how do we do this and be powerful and have our conviction, but also generous and graceful in that? And that's a big question. I don't have the answer yet, but I keep trying to balance those things. I say yet, like that's hopeful, right? I'll find it someday.
I think what you said about listening, that's really important because listening is extremely important. And then self-reflection. That's a big part of anti-bias work. And it's a journey. And it's just with one course, we can't be an anti-bias educator or with one workshop. It's really, but this self-reflection and introspection, it's a big part of our work. And it's a never-ending, actually, journey. And it's very important. So sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just, yes, we are. I just wanted to acknowledge a few things. One, I just want to acknowledge Nicole's statement about the experience you had physically, because I've had many experiences like that. And a lot of, people of color and marginalized people who are working in higher education, and I'm sure K through 12 as well, have had those experiences, really any job, right? But it's important to acknowledge that because racism has been declared a public health crisis. So we're not just this isn't just an illusion or just a one person experience. This is a national trend, and a lot of people are experiencing it, and that within itself is why this conversation should be happening, like in education everywhere, right? The other thing that I want to acknowledge is the lived experience of community people and people, when we are doing research, for example, in higher education institutions, lived experiences are not, especially for people of color, marginalized people are not considered, research the way that, other types of research would be, right? And I think that's also an extension of this not listening, of just how you categorize research within a university system and what's considered important and what's considered not, what's top tier, what's not. And I've experienced that personally, and a lot of my research, again, is related to African American preservation policy and, working with descendant communities and, just getting acknowledgement for that and the value of it. I think that's an extension. The research area is an extension of the operations and how, folks function within a college system. So I just wanted to add that as well as another important issue that's kind of connected to your question is the research, and what is considered valuable and what's not.
I think we're discovering something that we probably already knew, that our individual scholarships, if you will, whether it's, writing a book or teaching in the classroom or doing particular research or the archiving or workshops with teachers or dealing with leadership issues and all that, our work is a part of the same seamless web, right? we're all part of the same sphere of, well, in our paradigm, it's known as scholarship. All right, where we go after facts, where we are researching, we're in inquiry. Now, when you mentioned, what we learn from our students, like even at the kindergarten level, I remember this little story that a friend of mine told me. She's a teacher, and she teaches grades K through 4, and then every year it changes and all that. She says one day, a kindergartner asked her, this lovely little girl, she came up and says, Mrs., I'll just say Johnson, just to be, generic here. Miss Johnson, why do we dream? Right? I mean, think about that inquiry question. That is such a profound question. I mean, people in the physics sciences, in philosophy, in psychology, have been trying to figure out what is this consciousness business? What is the dream business? We haven't been able to come up with a theory, right? My own work involves consciousness because I'm concerned about whether or not AI is going to achieve what we call in our field singularity, where we are going to become one with AI and then consciousness will change, or the other level, right, on that cosmic level, the singularity of consciousness with the universe and all that. This little child, right, is giving us a question that we should ponder on a daily basis. Why do we dream? And what is that about, right? So what was her answer to the child? Right? She didn't really have an answer. And being a good teacher and caring about children, she said, well, that's a great question. We should think about that. We should talk about it. Do you dream? And do you remember your dream? And that sort of thing, right? They got into a dialogue about it. So inquiry is important, right? But community inquiry is even more important, right? Do people really get involved with the work? Or do we rely on the leaders to kind of like give us the formula to do this and that? Well, unfortunately, the world is run by what I would describe as a bunch of idiots. All right, look at the presidents of different countries and look at the leaders that want to start war, wage war, defend their so-called, territory with means of war and violence. And this is the 21st century. We're supposed to have been past this. We're supposed to be connected to our history. But do we teach history in the classroom? Right? I'm talking about all the way to the PhD level. Right? I've got students in my program that are working towards their doctoral degrees, and they don't know the history of Antioch University, for example. Horace Mann was the person that courageously started the college and allowed African Americans to come in without having to take a test, without having to be connected to an elite family somewhere and so on. Said, the average person, an American, and this was in the Midwest, right? It could be white, it could be black, it could be brown, it could be yellow, it could be green. I don't care. College should be available to all. And this was the first of its kind in this country. And then when we talk to our students, says, well, do you know that this is the business that we're in, right? To be connected to that history so we can continue that history. And then there are lessons to be learned from history that we need to implement things not to do, right? Starting wars, right? Solving problems, handing the keys over to a bunch of idiots, right? I mean, we've got an election coming up in less than 5 months. And what are our choices for top leadership? Or even at the Senate level or other, representative level and so on. So the work has to start, as you all kind of pointed out, from the ground level, right? So do we empower our students to help us do the work? Or do we just keep them at the distance, as I said earlier? And that's the question, right? I mean, but how do you do it? How do you empower the student? without creating like a kind of a chaotic intellectual system where, nobody knows, what to do and all that. And the order is not in place, the, syllabus goes to hell and all the rest of it, right? How do we do it? It's very tricky, right? So that should keep us up at night, right? How do we go about this? Because why? I remember when I first started teaching at the higher ed, it was my first year of teaching. I was so enthusiastic in the classroom and just, full of energy. And by the time like a 1 hour lecture was over, I was like, and one of my students, and this person was a Stanford graduate, he was just taking this was at the community college, he was just taking a class on film studies just for fun. He said to me, Tony, you need to slow down because you want to change the world at every class session. This is not going to work, right? But, I love your enthusiasm. And this was a student that was giving me wisdom, right? Granted, he was much older than me and well-educated person and all that. And then I learned about the numbers, right? Numbers tell a story. Right? I got some numbers here, and I want all of us to think about. What's the population of the United States? 51% women, 49% men. And we're supposed to be a democracy, right? The society is supposed to be a democracy. So the last time I checked, right, women made up about 27% of the United States Congress. And the men in Congress are always telling us, celebrate this, right? But the 117th United States Congress, people of color made up about 23% of the total membership. 23%, right? Well, let's see. We have African Americans, we have Asian Americans, and we have Latin Americans, right? We have indigenous Americans, and we have people like me, right? Coming from other parts of the world who call themselves hyphenated Americans, right? From the Middle East and so on and so forth. We have all these people. We're definitely more than 23% of the United States population. So what's going on here? What gives? What's happening with our leadership? Is we keep coming back to that, right? How do we turn a democracy that has gone, morally corrupt, back into a democracy in progress? These are abstract questions, but that's how you begin. You begin with abstract, and you go to work. So what I want to turn the discussion to is toward your specific work. And given the results you've had, whether it was dissertation work or a book work or the class work, research, right? The kind of scholarship that you're doing, the kind of results that you got that you can share with the world and say, here's what happens. Here's how we can change the world. Here's how we can equal the playing field, right? So level the playing field towards equality. So who wants to tackle this first?
I'm ready. Well, my work is, again, around African American historic preservation policy. And I have done a lot of research on Nicodemus National Historic Site, which is a federal park unit, and also Allensworth State Historic Park, which is a state park unit with California Department of Parks and Recreation. And one thing that I found in my research is very similar to the data that you were just reading off, that the representation is off. I don't have my statistics typed out, but I do believe last time I checked that for at least for California state parks and the National Park Service, it's like somewhere between 70 and 80% white male workers who are interpreting America's history and interpreting California history. And when you match that up with the population, there are a lot of groups that are severely underrepresented, and white people are overrepresented in terms of who's interpreting the history, who's telling it, who's putting together all the displays, and that spills over into public memory, right? In different ways. We could go deeper in that conversation, but I won't. And a lot of state agencies and departments and federal agencies and departments are like that. If we pulled the data, we would probably see similar data. It's underrepresentation. And what does that mean for the systems and the processes? Well, that explains it, right? That explains why everything that was actually built to run exactly the way that it's running is running the way that it is. The way that I address this with my students in terms of how, I approach educating them and preparing them. So I teach public policy courses, and my students have mostly been graduate students who are either working in government or working for an advocacy organization or a nonprofit organization that's doing some type of social, work and, trying to improve conditions for large amounts of people. That's basically what public policy is all about. And, some of them are going into, they want to become elected officials, so they'll be engaging policy making. Some of them are doing policy analysis. And policy analysis is really at the heart of the field of public policy. And that's basically, trying to come up with some solutions to address public problems. And we define public problems as problems that are impacting large groups of people in any given place, like homelessness, food insecurity. In my case, it's underrepresentation of African American history and public memory. And that is directly connected to, the fact that racism is a public health crisis. And what does that mean on the mental health, of Black people? But it's not just Black people who are impacted by this racism being a public health crisis. And just seeing the value of, when we address the issue of racism, we actually will make a better lived experience for everybody. That's one thing that a lot of people don't get. But what I do for my students is, I really take them through a journey to do the work on themselves. Because if you're going to be out here creating policies that are impacting large groups of people, you need to make sure that you are aware of your biases. You need to have taken that time to reflect on who you are as an individual and why you're even doing this work. What is your motivation behind wanting to create social change? I hope that you have good intentions, but it's important for you to do that reflection, that self-reflection, to think about, your critical ancestral history. Where are your people from? What did they experience? How did that create who you are today and how you perceive this public problem that you're staring at, this community that you're going into, these people that you're working with, and you're saying, hi, I'm from so-and-so university or from so-and-so department, and I'm here to help solve all your problems. It doesn't work like that. And especially when you're an outsider, those of us that are, people who identify as, Black or, some other group that is considered marginalized in this country, we have unique experiences when we go and do community work. Sometimes it's that we're coming in as an outsider. Sometimes it is, our own people that we're working with, but we're still coming from a university and we still have a level of privilege. I'm Dr. Ashley Adams, and that's how people are going to see me. But I'm also a Black woman. So, I experience both sides of that. And just to be aware of your positionality and that work that you're doing, that is the one thing, if students don't learn anything else in my class, when they leave their program, when they go out into the world, that I want them to have. I mean, the policy analysis tools, they're important, and I also get them to think about what tools are you using to analyze what's happening. Who created them? Because if they were created by, an older white man 10,000 years ago, you want to be aware of that there may be some biases as in that tool that you're using, and you want to be able to, adapt that, or maybe even create your own. I encourage students to just think deeply about the whole plan, the whole experience, so that they're able to deliver the most equitable recommendations to the communities that they're working for.
Thank you. Now we're getting specific.
Definitely. I want to add on to that too by mentioning a couple of things. I think Tony, if I remember the question right, I think I wrote down how to equal the playing field, right? Like what do we do to offer access to more and possibilities towards personal agency and support, right? So the way I think about that is kind of, there's three ways that I quickly responded, and one is follow the money. Who's benefiting from the system the way it is now? And then I'm going to trouble a little bit, Tony, how you kind of described what I'm going to just put in quotes as the other side, right? That we're run by maybe crazy folks or idiots. But I want to actually take those monikers away and say we're not. They're neither crazy nor idiots, but quite smart and very targeted. If we understand that, we can disagree with the outcomes. I think we see very close eye to eye on that one. But if we start to say, oh no, they're not just foolish, they're purposeful. What problem are they trying to solve? What problem do they see that their rhetoric or their narratives are looking plausible to folks, and not even just plausible, but actually optimal? So when we start to ask those questions and say, what are we not seeing about the problem? Why is this actually something that is having success in this country at this time? Then I think we're able to see what forces are at play. Maybe it's a perseverance of this idealized version of American values, but then to really peel back, as Ashley was saying, well, what are those values? Who are they written by, and who do they serve? And how do we start to question the foundations in which they're built? So one I would say is, again, follow the money. Assume folks are very purposeful in their rhetoric that they're using and inflammatory language or the policies that they're writing, because it is serving a population in this country. It's serving them quite well, as a matter of fact. Number three, I would say, is to understand the role of the university or education more broadly. But again, in my area, I look at university teaching or higher ed teaching and our role in perpetuating these kinds of oppressions. I was in a really impactful discussion with some writing faculty in which one of the writing center tutors says, he identifies as a Black man in the academy, also has his PhD, and says, can we even be anti-racist or do anti-racist in an institution that is founded on racist ideals? And it really struck me through the heart in that moment, because it was such an impactful question. I feel like the work I do pulls back the curtain. I make as much as I can, as transparent as I can. But I'm still teaching academic, standardized white English and the cultural values that language is built on. That's still part of what I'm doing. So how do I problematize that and say, I want to offer my students this language of power, because I can't deny that it has power. That's not helpful. So instead, how do I teach it, but then simultaneously ask them to critique it, to not perpetuate the hierarchizing or the hurtful language that gets embedded in having correct or good grammar or speaking educatedly or blah, blah, those things that just tend to hurt folks that don't have proficiency in this very narrow version of language. And so for me, doing this anti-racist work is dangerous. I also, like Ashley mentioned, I have some privileges here. I have a renewable full-time contract that allows me to take some liberties and say, this is how I'm going to teach, this is what I'm going to teach. And if I get fired, I'll be okay. I know that. I have, a soft landing place with some generational wealth, not a lot, but enough to know I'm not going to be, going homeless or hungry. I have a job that they're contracted to give me for so long, unless they have something really egregious, right? So I can take some of those liberties, and I share with my students that not all faculty, if they are working on contingent labor, that are going contract by quarter or semester by semester, they may not be able to take these kinds of risks in the classroom because they don't even need to be reprimanded. They just won't be renewed. And to understand that, and which brings me back to that number one, follow the money. Who can do this work? Who has the security, the generational wealth, the generational cultural collateral, the connections, the networks? And that's something we need to keep, that constant rotation of examining and critiquing if we're ever going to get to a place of a better playing field. I don't know that it'll be equal, but, you know, or or equitable, where we give, I love the visual of folks understanding that some people need more supports in place than others, right? My husband's 6'4". He doesn't have to get a stepladder to get the pot off the top shelf. I do. I need that extra support, turns out, you know, and so understanding how do we do that? How do we put that, you know, reach out and pull folks in us for that for that belonging that you're talking about?
With the privilege you talked about, that's what the problem with many of the teachers that I work with. They do not have that privilege. You know, especially preschool teachers, that they're not paid highly. You know, we've been working on this for so many years now, being an advocate for raising them. Anyway, that is and what you're doing, actually, you're also teaching them critical thinking skills that unfortunately many of my students in community college don't have. So for me, Tony, it starts with children. The earlier you start the anti-bias work, the better. But again, it has to be continuous. It can't be just in preschool, okay, we do this, but then they go to kindergarten, okay, maybe the teacher continues, but then, because many times we notice that when they get to be 8, 10 years old, a lot of those stereotypes are entrenched. And it's much, much harder. So the sooner we start, the better, actually. Yeah. And because children are not colorblind, we know this, all the studies show this. Children understand similarities and differences. Children, they can develop empathy. Children we teach them in an age-appropriate ways what is fair and what's not fair, because in 4 years of age, they say that, oh, no fair. So we build on that. We use that as an opportunity. So they understand what is a stereotype, what is a bias. I mean, is it fair? I mean, exclusion, rejection. A lot of it is in preschool and kindergarten and after school, but we work a lot on those. And then activism. Actually, in age-appropriate ways, how can they stand up for themselves and also for the others? So we start with kids. I mean, it's just, but teachers need training. And that's what you said. I mean, it's a lot to ask the teachers, okay, just do this. And no, it just takes a long time to learn. And teachers, the majority of the teachers that I've worked with, they are all well-intentioned, actually. But we are not immune to biases. So we bring our own history, our own experiences, our biases into the picture when working with children. So I always work, when I work with the teachers, I talk about my own biases. Then they open up about their own biases because the impact does not equal to intention. So I may have well intention, but the impact, the effects of it on the children and the communities is a lot. So we talk about it, a lot about that. So for me, it starts with children.
Can I add a little bit? So one thing I wanted to mention are some statistics. Let's see, I'm going to have to, my printer was wasn't playing nice with me today, so it's super small. But I want to go back to a little bit what you said, Miriam, about needing to teach the teachers and have some of that anti-bias training or bias education, anti-bias education, but that it also has to be elective, voluntary, authentically engaged in, because when we mandate it, the research behind that is that it doesn't work at all and can actually have a backfire effect. So if you're being forced into anti-bias training, turns out that's actually worse than not going at all. Okay, so understanding that we do this, in really authentic ways, and I think a lot of folks, as you mentioned, do have great intentions, but that sometimes the doesn't align with the impact or what is actually happening in our classrooms. But I did want to give a little bit of the statistics from higher ed. So my understanding here in the 2022-ish data is that 1.2 Americans hold a PhD. 1.2% of Americans hold a PhD. So super small amount. I mean, us up here and a few out here, we're, tiny percentage of the U.S. Of that 1.2%, 17% identify as Latine or Latinx. Okay, so that's me. I identify as Latine, I specifically Latina, more specifically Chicana. And then there's even a smaller percentage that are going to be women of that 17%, and an even smaller percentage that actually started their education at a community college. So I'm like an academic unicorn almost up here. There's not a lot of folks like me up here, right? But let me talk a little bit about, and this comes out of a book about higher education. So I'm quoting from Kathy Davidson, and she has a co-author that I unfortunately don't remember her name right now. But according to a 2017 study by the National Center for Education, 76% of all college and university faculty, let me say that again, 76% of all college and university faculty members were white, compared to 55% of undergraduates. So there's that discrepancy between who's teaching and who's being taught to, right? By ethnic group, just 5% of faculty members were Hispanic, compared to 20% of students. Again, we're pretty far off in terms of our representation. 6% of professors were Black, compared to 14% of their students. So that's staggering already. It tells us our representation numbers are not there. We're not representing and reflecting the student bodies that we're teaching. But there's one more statistic that really also gets me, and I share it whenever I can, which is why I asked for the mic back. One more statistic here is that one recent study of college professors revealed that some 80%, that is a lot, y'all, 80%. If there's an 80% chance of rain, we all assume it's going to rain. Am I right? That's okay. So some 80% of all faculty at U.S. colleges were trained at the most 25% of universities. The most elite universities, only a quarter of those are actually who's teaching most higher ed classrooms, okay? So, and in a study of political science departments, so specific field, right, revealed that more than half of all tenure track vacancies were filled by applicants from only 11 graduate political science programs. So we are pulling faculty from a very small percentage of universities and colleges, which means we're not actually representative of the career paths or even the educational paths that most of our students, the vast majority of our students, are going through. And we have to reckon with this data to understand how it informs our teaching practices, or what we call pedagogy, right? Like our policies, our assignment expectations, the way we talk about this has to be college level writing. What does that even mean? It is going to mean something different to almost any faculty member that's in front of a group of people and the people in their classrooms. So really peeling back and saying, this is what we're talking about, this is why we're talking about it, and then also problematize what those communication practices are even built on, or histories, or et cetera. So I wanted to add some of that data because I did print that off for this.
Let me just ask, I need to know the research that you refer to, that if the teachers are forced to take because anti-bias education is not an add-on. It is part of the it's not a curriculum that you can go buy it, a package, and then teach. It's not that. It is, it's a lens we see it. It's an approach. And it's the lens we see, and then based on that, then we can plan activities and strategies that we use with the children. It has 4 different goals: identity, diversity, justice, and activism that I referred to before just with examples. And we use, those are the framework. So whatever we do, those goals apply. So I like to know that research because it's actually part of NAY, a National Association now of Education of Young Child. It's, I've never heard of that research actually.
So the research I'm referring to is not specifically for teachers. So it's not reflecting the curriculum of K-12 educators, but there's certainly not that in faculty training. Like, there's certainly not a keystone of anti-bias lens framework in all of the things that we learn and teach. So what I'm talking about are the kinds of add-on professional development. And the statistic I was talking about also comes from the corporate world. So you're already working at, I'm just going to throw Google out there. I'm not saying this is true. I'm just giving an example of a big corporation. And they say to one of their departments, you must go through this 1-hour anti-bias training. That's what I'm talking about. That is not useful. If we use it as a framework or a lens in which we learn and teach and interact more holistically, that's a very different kind of setup than the sense of, because so many of us went through programs and education without that. So how do we reverse that trend is, okay, we need to seek that out, right? We need to seek that out.
Actually, most of the teachers, they don't go through this training. When I was at Stanford, we didn't talk about this at all. We talked about celebrations. You know, once a year celebration. We didn't. It wasn't something that I was trained in. I was trained afterwards. So now we are actually working, so this will be part of, and most of the college education, we're working on teacher education classes, so this will be part of it. And when I compare it to actually 30 years ago, we have come a long way. Actually, I'm glad about that. But with corporations, yes, I know because I'm very, very related to Silicon Valley because of my husband and all our friends. So yes, those, I mean, they just go sit down and take these classes and then forget about it. Because when I talk to people, I've seen that. That's when I say diversity is not it is not an empty word. Yeah.
Well, I'll say a few words, then I'd like us to kind of address some questions that folks may have and want to engage with us. Thank you. Wow. There's just so much to talk about, right? We could be here for hours talking about so many different dimensions of social justice. And then in the context of today's discussion, right, let me borrow a term from Kimberly Crenshaw and others have done important work in intersectionality, right? The connection between race, class, gender, sexual orientation, and I might add, economic status, right? Follow the money is really a good slogan to be used in the classroom, in everyday living and so on, because at the end of the day, right, we got to pay our bills, right? Who doesn't want to have a comfortable life? Who doesn't want to have the ability to be able to go to Costco and just buy whatever she wants, right? And then not worry about, well, do I pay my PG&E bill or do I buy these really beautiful cookies that I always wanted to have, but they're a little expensive, right? So why do we have to make those choices? So thank you. And thank you for the pushback against my note about idiots, right? I was thinking in philosophical terms because the philosophy of intelligence is that we have multiple intelligences, right? We have Howard Gardner to thank for that kind of theory. Many of our leaders are very smart in certain ways, right? How to do cost-benefit analysis without ethics. How to do cost-benefit analysis without caring about other human beings that don't look like us. Right? How to do a cost-benefit analysis and say, oh, I'm so sorry because this is what you learn in the workshop, right? tell your employees, oh, I'm so sorry we have to make these cuts. It'll make your life really difficult, and I really feel bad, I understand. But we have to do it because we have to be fiscally responsible. But how about you? How about you take a cut? And then I take a cut, we both take a cut, and then we build solidarity together, and the next time we'll be able to balance the books, right? But no, these idiots, let me just push back against your pushback, because they lack, and I say they're underdeveloped, they lack emotional intelligence, they lack historical intelligence, there's so many, Howard Gardner himself has added new categories to intelligence. They lack this business of humanist intelligence, right? You are a human being at the end of the day, right? You're a thinking animal. You're part of the ecosystem, however you want to pronounce it. Now, all of that is at play. Now, my research, because I presented the question, and you eloquently answered specifics. I'm looking at AI, which is dominating at least our field to begin with. It's been the most disruptive thing. Generative AI, ChatGPT, our students who are sitting in this room know all about that. How to learn how to do prompting so you can do actual research and so on and not cheat, etc. The ethics of AI is something that needs to be addressed, needs to be established, and that's my work, right? That's my research. So how does it work? That was Adele, by the way. AI, very quickly, I'm going to go down the list of how this stuff works because you may be interested. You may want to know, how does it work? How do they get these quick answers in like a millisecond to me? Well, AI, like the one you're interacting with now, say like, ChatGPT, or you go and do a transaction on your phone and so on, they are trained, right? They're systems that are trained with enormous amount of data. Most of it collected for free, right? Every time you go and buy something somewhere, you're sending your data to somebody, and data brokers make money, et cetera, et cetera. There is data collection, of course, right? Then there is data labeling, right? In some cases, data needs to be labeled to provide context for the AI. Then there's pre-processing. So it's quite involved, and human beings are involved in this. So this is the thing that they never tell you. You always think, oh, it's a machine teaching machine, teaching machine, teaching machine. Yes, in the process it is, but there's somebody who's pushing the buttons there, right? Model selection. This is where all this business of racism, anti-bias, and all this stuff enters the picture, or doesn't, all right? What is not said is more important than what is said. There's no transparency with development of AI products, right? And it's on purpose, right? It's not accidentally on purpose, it's on purpose, right? So then there's training. Machines have to be trained. One machine, this is where the machine trains the other machine. Then there's validation. And again, human element enters the picture. Oh, does it check out? Does it check the facts and all of that? Not always. Testing, they have to test it, right? They release ChatGPT 3.5 just like that, right? Out there with no oversight, with no regulation, with no government, because again, let's come back to the idiots, right? In Congress, they are clueless about how this stuff works. Their staffers are very smart, right? 22-year-old staffer is telling the congressman, look, this is how this stuff works. Shut up, just go give me the Coke, right? I got to go and give a talk. Testing, and then there's fine-tuning. And this is where, again, the ethics enters the picture. This is what I'm finding. I'm finding that people of color represent less than 2% of the movers and shakers of tech. I'm not talking about like CEOs and stuff. We're talking about like engineers and people that actually do the work. Like Elon Musk didn't invent Tesla, right? He just told people, this is what we want. I got the money. Let's go do it. I just bought this company. And then I'm going to go out there and take credit for all your work. Right? That's how it works. And then they want that kind of data. Put that data in there. So test it out. Go to ChatGPT, write something about racism, like something that has to do with this discussion here today. Go watch YouTube, grab the transcript, grab a part of it, give it to ChatGPT, and say, humanize this for me, or rewrite it, or make it professional. That's a good one. That prompt is good. Make it professional. All of a sudden, a lot of things are gone. All right? All the talk you were giving us about, doing the ancestral, historical work and all that, like, it kind of like goes into the abstract and the ambiguous world. This is what I'm finding with my research. So that needs to change. If we're able to deregulate, right? I'm sorry. See, it's embedded assumptions. If you're able to regulate, right, the tech world, if we're able to break up the giants, right, break up Google, break up Facebook, break up OpenAI is a giant now. It was a little company, it was nonprofit. All of a sudden, it's a for-profit company, and then they just disbanded their anti-bias, forum, the people that like us would get together and all of that. I'm not getting calls to become a consultant for OpenAI. I don't know why, but I should be. Anyways, so that's what we're finding. We need to do it because that's the classroom, right? Our students are going to learn regardless, right? They're going to be smarter than us, knowing where to push the buttons and everything. We need to learn how to push the buttons so we can work with them, right? So that's what I mean by AI literacy, and that's my work. And so does anybody have like a pressing question? You're saying, hey, this is what keeps me up at night, and I want to ask you and see if you have something to say about it. Yes, please.
The question I had was, how can educators encourage minority groups to take positions of leadership when they don't see themselves represented and therefore feel that they shouldn't be in those positions?
I think one way is for faculty to be transparent about how they've built coalitions within their communities, even if they're outside of their specific field. So in other words, finding your people that prop up leaders, even if they're in neuroscience and I'm in writing, right? We can still build a community together so that we have a support system. We talk about that trust that Ashley pointed to earlier, that we have a sounding board for those moments when we're really in a tricky spot. I think again, if it is in your field specifically, depending on what representation looks like, I would say if there's any representation at all, one or two NASA scientists that identify as folks of color, reach out to them. One of the things I would say is people are surprised at how responsive folks are. Like there's this sense of, oh, they're too big, they have that book, or they've been to space, or I don't know, whatever the things that we tell ourselves, they won't care about me. And how often that's not true. They are looking for mentors. They will take time. I reached out when I was still a grad student, and I went back 10 years after I had gotten my bachelor's degree to enter my master's degree work. And I had this big wig scholar come and do a talk, and I was like, oh, he asked a really important question that I wanted to follow up to. And I was already in my 30s and still super nervous to email this guy, felt like, oh, he'll never talk to me. He responded within like 20 minutes and was just like, here's a whole bunch of other stuff. Let me know if you want any more, if you want a conversation. It was really impressive. So that's what I would do. That's what I tell students all the time is like, it's tough in a generation that we're not used to calling or reaching out to folks, and we've been in this COVID lockdown. But once you do it once and you get a positive response, or you do it a few times and finally get that positive response, or practice with me. Right? I'm your mentor. I'm here, and I do teach writing, so it also syncs up with my field. But come practice with me. I will help you, do this. And I think even just that kind of generosity tends to help folks say, oh, there are ways through. There are people around me. Who am I looking at? Who am I looking to? Does that help answer the question? Okay. And there may be other strategies.
Yeah. What do I have to say about all of that? Well, Donald Trump, it's been reported widely that as soon as the convictions, 34 convictions, were announced, as soon as, like within hours, $52 million were raised. And, people think, oh, it was just the individual Americans, they're idiots and all that. No.
No.
Big businesses are behind all of this, right? And this comes back to your point. You're right. They're very smart about this stuff.
Yeah.
So they want this guy because you might think he's a clown, right? But he's a charlatan that's going to go out there and do the bidding for them. So they don't have to be the bad guy. And they've been very successful with this system, right? And so how do you go about countering that? Is the question. I think question within your question, right? How do we go? It's a difficult thing because one of the things that happens with AI, one of the ethical problems with the AI is the fake accounts, right? The fake accounts, they can be perpetuated with money, right? Follow the money. So if you got some money, then you can create fake accounts, counter that, or fake accounts to perpetuate that, which is what's happening right now. So truth is being treated so casually these days. And that's one of our problems in the classroom. How do we convey that to our students? That, look, the truth matters, all right? Truth, I'm talking about truth with the lowercase t. But then they say, look, at all the leaders. They're lying all the time. They're teaching us that truth is what you make it. Whatever you make, you call it truth, is truth. So why do I have to listen to you? So that's going to keep me up at night.
Yeah.
So maybe some melatonin is needed. Yes.
Can this be tied into public memory? That's a term that actually used in her presentation.
Yeah, I was actually thinking that everything that you're saying, that's the goal, right? To impact public memory and culture and to, impact public behavior, which that's actually technically a government intervention. It's a type of government intervention. The government will intervene in order to change public behavior. And unfortunately, sometimes, our elected officials or those who wish to become elected officials again, even though they should not ever become elected officials again, will, play dirty to impact public behavior in a naughty way, which is what we're seeing with this situation, unfortunately. Yeah, well, I don't want to tell you how old I was in 1984, so I probably don't remember. Let's just say I was still, probably going to those preschools that you were talking about earlier.
It's interesting. I saw a meme on Facebook the other day, which I shared with some friends. It was George Orwell. It was a picture of Orwell reading 1984 in his hand, right? But he was reading in present time, right? And then the picture changed. It went from 1984 to 2024. And he was like this. It's incredible, right? I think the literary world owes us, and they have a moral obligation to do something about this. I heard recently that Stephen King has come out publicly talking about the dangers of racism and all these things that we're seeing. Let's just call it the extreme right-wing politics that is permeating every aspect of our lives. I could be wrong. Maybe somebody in the audience has heard about Stephen King saying this. And, he's a household name, right? He's written 1 million books. He recently just published a collection of stories that he had found or his son had found in drawers in his house and so on. And that's going to sell like hotcakes, I'm sure. And some might be good, some might be bad. But, I think we need to have new George Orwell's, telling us about the present history, right? Because history, perhaps we have historians sitting next to me, so I'm humbled and I get permission to say this. Is it okay to say that history is not just about the past, but it's about the present? And doesn't the future determine the past? Yeah. So we need literature so we can have, right, take it to the classroom, take it to public forums, go on YouTube, get on Instagram, and teach about this. Like the forces on the other side have all the money, but we do have, if we have the know-how about how to turn the tables with AI, there's a lot we can do. AI literacy is absolutely vital right now. Does anybody else want to add anything to all of this? Yes.
Yeah, I have a question. As you all know, the burdens and crimes of history fall most heavily on the shoulders of those that are marginalized. And I'm struck by the goodwill and friendliness by which you have presented yourself here to us. You have, enjoyed each other, and I was struck by that. So as I was listening to you, I wanted to know, how do you approach the sentiments of resilience and joy in the teaching of what it is that you do teach?
What a great question.
Okay, bear with me for a second, because I do have, hi Falk, I do have a story. I hope I get through this without crying, okay, because I'm feeling the feels. I can feel them tingle right now on my shoulders, so I'm like, oh gosh, okay, but February, March was a really hard time for me for multiple reasons, but one of which I was just exhausted and feeling like this work is overwhelming, it's impossible, why do I even do it? Just give up, Nicole, go retire somewhere and sip a pina colada on an island. Like I was really feeling in that kind of space. And I had talked to a few folks about this. Anyway, I was then invited to go to, or I saw a advertisement for Clarence B. Jones and Sterling K. Brown doing a conversation at USF. And if you're not familiar, Clarence B. Jones worked with Martin Luther King, was a speechwriter and attorney, and remains an activist at 90-something years old, 94-ish, I think. Anyway, Sterling K. Brown recently won an Emmy or maybe Oscar, I think it was Oscar, for a film role, Black identified male, doing incredible work. He was nominated, yes. And it was before the, he was nominated for American Fiction, and the talk was before the Oscars came out. So at that point, we didn't know if he was going to win or not. Anyway, so I go to this event, and it was inspiring and wonderful, but there was really this moment that struck me when I was at one of my lower points of feeling overwhelmed, where Clarence B. Jones looks at Sterling K. Brown and just says, it is, and I'm paraphrasing here because it's not caught in my exact words, but in his exact words, but Clarence B. Jones looks at Sterling K. Brown and just says, you are the fruition of my dream, of our dream. When I'm sitting here talking, because one of his mentors and people that he was side by side as Martin Luther King was gunned down during the civil rights movement. He said, you are who King died for. You are up there, celebrated, Stanford grad from Tisch University, Oscar nominated, doing the work, being Black excellence. And I was so humbled to be in that room and just go, oh, wait, no, it is working. Oh, shoot, Nicole, that's right. Look for the progress, because that fuels us. And so for me, Dr. Kameen, that was that moment of just joy and reminder of how much, but I'm teaching at a private institution. My mother and father could have not dreamt that for themselves. They dreamt it for me, but they did not dream it for themselves. And so for me, it's like reflection of going, oh gosh, we have come a really far way. And I am privileged based on that. That, and then the second part is I also Zumba. I get out of my brain, I get into my body, and I dance and I laugh, and I do take a moment to forget the hard work and all of that too, and remind myself that I'm here to experience joy as well. So thank you for asking that question, because I felt like it gave me a moment to remind myself, oh yeah, that's why I keep doing this.
So I guess ultimately the question boils down to, we started the conversation by saying what keeps you up at night, but what gets you up in the morning is the question here now. Yeah. So, yeah. I share that sentiment. Well, there's a couple of things. I get up in the morning, every morning I say this to myself. I'm not joking, and I'm not trying to be like, theatrical here. I really do say this to myself today. I go, today is going to be a great day. Chances are, I'm going to hear the news, and there we go again, bombing, etc. But it's just something inside that keeps me going. This is one dimension of it. And I remember being 5 years old and having the same feeling. So is it a byproduct of, genetic, makeup that we've had passed on generation after generation? Also, the family environment, the parents who gave us love and encouragement about being, living life passionately. Then the other dimension is, I'm a parent. I have a child. And I think I have a moral responsibility to make this place a better place for him. And so, I don't want to destroy things. And then later, he says, well, it was, my parents' generation. They screwed things up for us. And I give young people who are in this room a lot of credit for not slapping us in the face and saying, hey, you screwed things up for us. Now here you are sitting telling us, do the right thing, do all of this stuff, right? We're all in it together, right? So now, one little story, which I'm sure my colleagues here and folks in here also perhaps have these experiences. And these are known as transformative experiences. Every now and then I get an email from a student, like, it's like, I'm so-and-so, I took your class such and such year, right? And it was because of your class that I went into this major, I got my degree, and here I am doing this. And I was like, damn, that's why I do this, right? And I'm right there, I'm transformed once again, right? And I'm thinking, okay, it's all worth it, right? Yeah, I'll deal with that idiot, so-and-so. But, it really is worth it. If you're religious, right, it's a calling. If you're not religious, it's still a calling. So that's all I got to say about this. My colleagues want to say some last words. And we'll see where we'll go from.
Okay, this will be my final word. I think for me, for today, I think for me, it definitely is rooted in my faith in God and also my family and my tribe. I brought my family here with me today. Shout out to my mama and my auntie. And I also took my mom and my auntie with me to the NCORE conference last week in Honolulu, Hawaii, to celebrate their milestone birthdays, which I won't say how old they are, but the NCORE conference is a national conference on race and ethnicity in higher education, and all of you can go to NCORE next year. Faculty, staff, students, anybody connected to a college, just want to plug that. But for me, the motivation comes from, knowing my family history. I'll end my final statement on where I started, because I'm pretty sure Falk knows this story, that she's heard me tell this before, that when I was working on my PhD, I learned about my great 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 grandfather learning how to read for the first time in his life in his late 20s when he was enslaved in Kentucky. And there was a runaway slave that was staying around in the area where he was enslaved. And this runaway slave taught my great 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 grandfather how to read. And he taught him the alphabet using the dirt on the ground as a chalkboard. And learning that story was transformative for me. That changed my life. I got straight A's when I was in my PhD program. But you know what? That was the first time in my life that I ever got straight A's. That's how I know I'm supposed to be a public policy professor, because I love the subject and the field. But the reason why I got straight A's is because I was motivated in a different type of way than I ever had been in my life about my education and how important this was. And so, I carry that story with me everywhere I go. Whenever I speak publicly, I always bring my ancestors with me because I'm reminded of how far we have come together. I am here and I know that they're here with me. And, that's a part of my faith and my spirituality. So that's what keeps me motivated, because this work can be very draining. I've had a lot of tears too, Nicole. I'm not going to cry here today, but being a woman, a Black woman professor in America in 2024 is not an easy job. And I am elevating in my career. I have a special appointment in the dean's office. We have an all women crew because we are a former women's college, and it's a very supportive environment, and I'm blessed and I'm grateful to God for that. And that's all I can say about that.
Actually, well, I'm very passionate about anti-bias work. It's very difficult, not very comfortable, but I'm very passionate. So, but I want to say something that kind of you reminded me, and you said your ancestors. It is so important for me that one day, maybe my great-great-granddaughter reads my book and say, oh, that's why they came from Iran. So that's why I published, I brought it to show Tony and Ida. I published my book, it's 400 pages that's only the reason for my family. Because they don't want it to be published. And with documents, because my father was in jail after the revolution, my brother was in political prison, and their stories of imprisonment and their escape from Iran. And so I interviewed everybody in the family and why they came. And then what you said also, it's very important that I complemented the immigration story, finished. The other part is who we were in Iran. And my mother, for example, when Reza Shah was the king in 1935, banned the hijab in Iran, that a lot of people don't know the history. My mother was graduating that year from community college. So her picture was in the newspaper. So I want, hopefully, one day, my great-great-granddaughter say, oh, that was my grandmother, look. She was there. Or what my father did, the social justice work that he did in Iran for the retirees. And I hope that stays in the family. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that's my hope. Yeah. That's why I did it. Yeah, thank you.
Professor Dargahi, I think it's that time, all right?
So, thank you everybody for coming. I want to thank again your control, to be sure. So, for letting us to just have this wonderful event here at the California Research Center, and our great, wonderful panelists. Thank you for coming, and our students and all guests. Thank you so much. And of course, I wish we have more of these panel discussions in future. Thank you so much. Thank you.